All right, so have you ever, I don't know, ever thought about how a fantasy novel could actually change a whole D&D campaign?
Huh?
I'm asking because something crazy happened in my game last week. One of my players, super into this, epic fantasy series, decided to base their character's backstory on it. And oh my God, it was like a bomb went off in our world. Suddenly we're dealing with prophecies, ancient artifacts, even a whole continent I never planned for.
Yeah.
Total chaos, but honestly, the campaign is way more interesting now. It really got me thinking about what other books have had this kind of impact on gaming,
That's a great question. It really shows how powerful stories can be, especially in RPGs. I mean, the lines between fiction and the game get really blurry. And Gary Gygax, the D&D guy, he knew that. He wasn't just happy with making a game. He wanted to build a whole world, a place where players could really get lost, and he saw novels as a way to make that world bigger than the tabletop. It was almost like a marketing strategy, if you think about it.
I've definitely heard of Gord the Rogue, but I'll admit I haven't actually read the books. Can you give me and our listener some background? Where does this all start?
Well, Gord's first appearance was actually in a short story, At Moonset Black Cat Comes, published in Dragon magazine way back in 1980, but it wasn't until '85 that he got his own novel, Saga of Old City. That was the first book in the Greyhawk Adventure series. And remember, this is after Gygax co-created D&D and, helped create the Greyhawk setting.
Right, Greyhawk. That was one of the first official D&D settings.
Exactly, and Gygax loved it. He wanted to make it feel real, gritty, a world with, moral gray areas, That's where Gord comes in. He wasn't your typical hero. He was a rogue, a survivor. He had to make tough choices in a world that wasn't always black and white. Gygax even said that Gord was partly inspired by his own son, Ernie, who was a D&D player and, as he put it, a rogue at heart.
That's really cool. It makes Gord feel more grounded,
Yep.
Someone you might actually meet in a game.
Right. And that was Gygax's genius. He was connecting the book and the game, giving readers and players a shared language of adventure. And it wasn't just about the character either. Through Gord, Gygax really fleshed out the world of Greyhawk.
Can you give us some examples? What details did these books bring to life? I was thinking about how, in my game, the player's backstory added this whole thing about a lost elven city, hidden in the mountains. It suddenly made our world feel so much bigger.
It's amazing what a little detail can do. And Gygax was great at it. Take the city of Greyhawk.
Yeah.
In the novels, you get this picture of its streets, markets, even the criminal underworld. He describes the different parts of the city, the groups fighting for power, the secrets. It's like a dream for a dungeon master,
Yeah.
A ready-made setting full of adventure.
It makes me think about how Gord the Rogue must have influenced dungeon masters back then. It's like they suddenly had this detailed plan for a world they could use in their own campaigns.
Absolutely. Gygax was giving them tools to make their stories richer. And it wasn't just about the setting either. He was also introducing themes that changed how people played D&D.
Ooh, this is getting interesting. I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What kind of themes did he explore? And how did they change the game?
Well, one thing was this idea of moral ambiguity. Gord always faced choices where there wasn't an easy answer.
Yeah.
Right or wrong, he had to weigh the consequences, think about how his choices affected others, and sometimes he even had to, compromise his own values to survive.
That's so different from the typical, good versus evil story that you saw in so much fantasy back then.
Exactly. It was a more realistic way to tell stories in an RPG. Gygax was challenging players and dungeon masters to think about their choices, to, realize that actions have consequences, and that even good intentions can sometimes lead to bad things.
It's like he was saying, hey, the world isn't black and white, there are shades of gray.
Exactly. And that idea had a huge impact on RPGs. It made players create more complex characters with flaws and motivations. It pushed dungeon masters to come up with scenarios that weren't just about fighting and loot, but about ethical dilemmas and making tough decisions.
And speaking of complexity, didn't the Gord the Rogue series also bring in these power struggles in Greyhawk? Remember how my player's backstory ended up being tied to this ancient prophecy about a power-hungry lich? It totally flipped the power dynamics in our game.
You're right. Power struggles were a big theme in the books, and it reflected what players often faced in their own games. You had all these factions in Greyhawk: nobles, merchants, thieves, guilds, even cults worshipping old gods. All of them wanted control, and Gord was always caught in the middle, just trying to survive.
It's like Gygax was showing that power isn't just about brute force. It can be about influence, manipulation, knowing the right people.
You got it. And that added a whole new layer to D&D. It encouraged players to think beyond just combat skills. They had to think about their social skills, their connections, their ability to read a situation and make smart decisions.
It sounds like Gord the Rogue wasn't just a fantasy series. It was like a masterclass in storytelling, character development, and world building, all in one.
I think that's a great way to put it. But there's another side to the series that we haven't talked about yet. Its impact on the audience.
Oh, you mean how it maybe expanded the audience beyond just the hardcore D&D players? That's interesting.
It is, and it goes back to what you said about your player using elements from a fantasy series they liked. Imagine someone who loves fantasy novels but finds D&D kind of scary.
Yeah, all those rulebooks can be a lot.
Exactly. But then they find a book like Gord the Rogue. They get sucked into the story, they love the world and the characters, and suddenly D&D isn't so scary anymore.
It's like the novel is a gateway to the world of tabletop RPGs.
I like that. And I think that was part of Gygax's plan. He wanted to make D&D more accessible, to show people that it wasn't just about dice and fighting, but about experiencing amazing stories and worlds beyond your imagination.
So he was using fiction to bring in new players. That's brilliant.
It was a smart move, and it helped D&D become the king of tabletop RPGs. But to really understand Gord the Rogue, we need to look at Gord himself. Who is he? What makes him tick?
All right, let's get into it. Tell me about Gord.
Gord, he's a fascinating character. Really embodies that classic rogue, you know? Cunning, resourceful, always has a witty line or a dagger up his sleeve. But he's way more than just some thief. He starts off as this street kid, born poor in Greyhawk, like picture Oliver Twist, but with lockpicks and a talent for staying out of trouble. To survive, he had to learn all these skills in the city's underbelly, picking pockets, blending in, talking his way out of messes, you know?
I can see why so many D&D players would connect with that. Starting from nothing, using your wits to beat the odds, that's pure D&D.
Absolutely, and that makes Gord so relatable. He's not some, super-powered hero. He's just a normal guy in a dangerous world. But the cool thing is how he changes throughout the books.
You mentioned that moral ambiguity before. Does he, ever actually cross the line, become a bad guy?
That's what makes Gord so interesting. He's always walking this line between good and bad, having to make choices that test his conscience. In one book, he's hired to steal this magical thing. But then he finds out it's the key to keeping a powerful demon locked up. So he has to decide, right? Does he finish the job and risk unleashing chaos? Or does he try to stop it and risk his own life?
That's a tough one. It's like those classic D&D moments where the party finds a powerful item and has to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah.
Use it, destroy it, hide it.
Exactly. And those decisions have huge consequences, just like they do for Gord in the novels. But even with his job and all the shady stuff he gets involved in, deep down, Gord's a good guy. He wants to do the right thing, even if it means risking himself or going against powerful people.
That's struggle. Trying to hold on to your values in a world that constantly tests them. I think a lot of people, not just D&D players, can relate to that.
For sure. It's a universal thing, and Gygax does a great job exploring it through Gord. He doesn't shy away from showing Gord's flaws, his weaknesses, his internal battles, and that makes him feel real, you know?
We talked earlier about how Gord the Rogue was like a guide for dungeon masters to make more immersive worlds. Did Gygax actually include stuff that could be used directly in a game?
Oh, yeah, totally. The books are packed with details about Greyhawk. Specific places, characters, groups, even rumors and legends. Dungeon masters could literally take whole chunks and put them right into their campaigns.
Like what? Any examples come to mind?
Well, one I always remember is the Thieves Guild in Greyhawk City. Gygax describes everything, the hierarchy, how they work, their secret signs and passwords, all the stuff a DM would need to use them in a game.
Wow. It's like he was giving dungeon masters a behind-the-scenes tour of Greyhawk.
Exactly. And it gets even better. He even gave Gord stats, so DMs could actually use them as a character in their games.
No way. He statted out Gord.
Yep. It's in that article we read. In 5th edition, he's a rogue fighter multi-class, high dexterity and charisma. Skills like stealth, acrobatics, persuasion, perfect for sneaking around and making deals.
That's so cool. It's like he's stepping right out of the book and into a D&D game.
And that shows Gygax's vision. He didn't separate the world of the story from the world of the game. They were all part of the same thing.
Speaking of vision, we've talked a lot about how Gord the Rogue impacted the D&D world. But what about the problems it faced? Weren't there some legal issues after Gygax left TSR?
Yeah, when Gygax left TSR, the company that was publishing D&D, it definitely caused some problems for Gord the Rogue.
Yeah, it was a mess. Gygax leaving led to all these arguments about who owned what, characters, stories, you name it. really messed with the series.
So even though the books were doing well, all that stuff behind the scenes made it hard to, keep it going. It did. It's a bummer because, people really loved Gord's story. But even with those problems, Gord the Rogue was still a huge success.
You keep saying success and impact. What made Gord the Rogue so important, especially looking back on it now?
Well, for one, Gord the Rogue basically invented a new way to market RPGs. Before those novels, it was all about rulebooks, modules, that kind of stuff. Gygax showed that a good story could really draw people into a game world.
Yeah, it's something you've said before, and it's making a lot of sense now. Like, he was saying, forget the technical stuff, just feel this world.
Exactly. And that really connected with people. Gord the Rogue helped make Greyhawk a really popular D&D setting, but it goes way beyond that. Modern RPGs like tabletop games, shows like Critical Role, even video games like The Expanse, they all owe something to Gygax.
I definitely see the connection to Critical Role. Their characters are so well developed, their backstories are like super detailed. It's like watching a fantasy TV show.
Right. And The Expanse, even though it's sci-fi, it still has that same like gritty realism, the moral gray areas that Gygax brought to Greyhawk. It's about people making hard choices in a world where good and bad aren't always clear.
It's wild to think about how Gygax's ideas from, 40 years ago are still influencing games today. But what about the series itself? Did Gord the Rogue ever actually finish?
It did. Gygax really wanted to finish Gord's story, even with all the problems. He actually ended up self-publishing the last book, Dance of Demons, just to give fans a proper ending. Really shows how much he cared about the character and the readers,
It really shows his passion, both for the story and for the community he helped build. So, where does that leave us? What's Gord's legacy in RPGs today?
Gord's legacy is, a lot of things. He gave dungeon masters tons of material to use in their games. But more importantly, he showed everyone what was possible in RPG storytelling.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Gord showed that RPG characters don't have to be simple. He brought depth, complexity, moral struggles to a genre that, a lot of times, was just about fighting and treasure.
He made the rogue, human.
Exactly. He showed that even in a world with magic and monsters, it's the human stuff that matters. Our choices, our struggles, our flaws. That's what really grabs people, and that idea is just as important now as it was back when Gygax created Gord.
Wow, what a story. Big thanks to LitRPG Reads and Paul Bellow for the article that started this whole deep dive. It's amazing how one character, made so long ago, can still have such a big impact on stories and games.
Yeah, totally agree. Shows you the power of a good story.
And everyone listening, we'll leave you with this. Think about your own RPG experiences, whether you're a player or a dungeon master. Is there a character from a book or a movie or wherever who's really influenced how you play the game, how you make characters, or even, how you make decisions in real life? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Gord the Rogue.